Welcome back to the Just Mets podcast. The Mets are indeed having a fire sale. I'm your host, Rich MacLeod, here solo this week. Me and Andrew will be doing something together tomorrow for the trade deadline. We'll get into that more at the end of this episode. But coming at you live here on Sunday after the Mets finish up another lackluster week of baseball. What else is new? We will not get into the nitty-gritty of the games themselves too much, I suspect, over the course of this episode, because the thing that everybody wants to talk about right now is the trade deadline. And it is now officially heating up right as the game was starting on Sunday afternoon against the Marlins. The news came out that the Mets officially traded Freddy Peralta, who they acquired earlier this offseason, supposed to be their ace. The Mets have traded Freddy Peralta to the Tampa Bay Rays. That trade is now officially official. Both teams have announced it. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. The Mets also moved on from AJ Minter a few days ago, got an interesting return from him as well. And I would suspect there are a lot more trades that will likely be coming in the next 25 hours or so before the official trade deadline, which is Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Again, we'll have some programming around that tomorrow that we'll get into. But before we dive in, very, very quick recap of the week that was. The Mets go 3-4, which for this team, not particularly terrible, though not ideal when you start the week winning a series. The Mets won 2 out of 3 against the Braves. But then, as the Mets tend to do, they quickly lose 3 of 4 against the Marlins. Very funny how many games over the years have the Mets scored a ton of runs, and people on Twitter, or maybe like your dads or your uncles, will text you and be like, hey, like, save some runs for tomorrow. And most of the time it's a joke, but it does feel like with the Mets that seems to always actually wind up being true. The first game of the homestand this past week, the Mets scored 14 runs, beat the absolute tar out of the Braves. In the 6 games since then, the Mets have scored 11 total runs. So they have yet to match their total run output from the first game of the week. Again, not a surprise. This team is very, very bad. It is why they are very likely going to be blowing up their roster, at least with any guy who's not under contract for multiple years. They are the worst offense in Major League Baseball. They're one of the worst teams here after the trade deadline. For me, it's, can we just be a little stinker and ruin these team seasons? Because that's all we have at this point. Who the hell knows how that's going to play out? And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that with, the Dodgers went out and did what the Dodgers do, and the other 29 teams in baseball, or 28 teams, I guess, do what they do, which is have no interest in stopping the Dodgers, who get Tarek Skubal on Saturday night for what I think is viewed to be a not particularly great trade package, and one that I think a lot of people looked at and was like no other team could have beaten this. This one isn't about the infinite money that the Dodgers have system, along with Brandon Sproat, who was, still decently ranked at the time. Neither has had a great year. Jet Williams has mostly struggled in the minor leagues. Brandon Sproat, Mets actually saw him and did pretty well against him when they went to Milwaukee about a week or two ago. But he has struggled. He's got an ERA over 5 this year with the Brewers. And Jet Williams, as I said, hasn't been great in the minor leagues, but he's still young. But the Freddy, but they get 3 prospects. They're all mid-ranked in the Mets farm system. MLB.com has already updated their rankings. Season here in New York, not just for Peralta, but for the team, didn't wind up playing out that way. Peralta's performance has a lot to do with it, though. You can't adjusts there and adjusts to the American League, which he'll be pitching in for the first time in his career. But the Rays, they're one of the top teams when it comes to, fixing pitchers. We thought that the Mets are one of those teams. Doesn't look like that's the case, at least this year and really mostly last year as well. But it seems like a very good situation for Peralta, and I have nothing against the guy. It's like personally, he was very bad. I'm glad to not have to watch this version of him anymore. But I don't wish any ill will against him. And I don't think most Met fans would, honestly. A few days ago, the Mets made their first trade of this, active fire sale that they're now in. AJ Minter got traded pretty late the other night. Naturally, I think the trade happened at midnight, probably right after I went to sleep. But AJ Minter, you knew he was going to get traded. He commented a few weeks ago himself, like, that his new goal was to just get the Mets as good of a prospect return as he could get them. Minter was solid this year. Obviously, he didn't pitch almost at all last year. The Mets signed him to a 2-year deal coming from the Braves, missed most of last year and the start of this year, but was really solid. 2.31 ERA. His velocity was down. He was throwing mostly 92 this year. Has reverse splits. He was actually far more effective against right-handed hitters than left-handed hitters. I think the OPS against him it's almost like 150 to 200 point difference between righties and lefties, which is interesting. He goes to the Minnesota Twins, and again, not, for a left-handed reliever, that's probably not going to be your number one lefty out of the bullpen who doesn't throw very hard. I don't think that you could have expected to get a ton back from him. This is about, I think, what you could expect to get back from Minter, and it is a pretty fun return just because the Mets get two prospects here. They get a shortstop named Bruin Agbayani, and if that sounds familiar, it's because it is Benny Agbayani's 19-year-old son, which is pretty awesome. Agbayani is injured at the moment, but I think they expect him to play again soon. He's now ranked 25th in the Mets farm system, so they're now new 25th ranked prospect, which is just fun. Just you have the family connection there. I don't know if he'll ever, turn into anything, but I think that added element brings a little bit more excitement to fans. And then they get this first baseman named Billy. I think it's Billy Amick is how it's pronounced. He's not ranked with the Mets farm system at the moment. I went through about an hour ago, actually, of all the prospects the Mets have received so far this year in these sell-offs. Amick is the only guy that they've gotten who's not ranked in their top 30. But this guy does seem like he has really interesting power, which I think, maybe the Mets, and it seems like David Stearns has had this approach in the drafts where he kind of just goes for high ceiling, even if the floor could be potentially really low. And the one thing Amick has is a ton of power. I'm trying to pull up his minor league stats right now. I believe he's up to 24 home runs already in Double-A, which is pretty impressive. If his stats will ever come up for me, because the minor league baseball website is very difficult to use. Okay, we're going to Baseball Reference instead. Yeah, so this year in Double-A with Minnesota and now the Mets, he just made his debut the other day. Billy Amick has 24 home runs, 74 RBI, 14 doubles. He's slugging 494 this year. He's actually like getting on base really well as well. He's got a 340 on base. The thing that he struggles with, and this is why he's an unranked prospect for this team, is the batting average. He swings and misses a lot. He struck out 108 times already this year, which is insane, over double the amount of walks he's had. He's had 50 walks. Again, he's getting on base at a good clip, but he's hitting 222. He's striking out quite a bit, but he does have an 834 OPS at first base. So it seems like a decent, just big cut that they're taking at a guy who maybe he won't turn into anything. The odds are he likely won't, but in the event that they found a diamond in the rough, big power hitter at age 23 in Double-A in this trade, I think it's a worthwhile swing to take. He's played one game with the Mets and he homered in it. That was his 24th home run of the season. So that was fun to see. And I'll be curious to watch him develop. I'll be curious. Honestly, I'm very curious to see what's going on with first baseman in the Mets farm system the rest of this year with the way that Ryan Clifford has really kind of fallen off the map as a prospect, with the way that he has struggled to make contact. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch Amick and even Cole Mathis, who we'll talk about in a second, that they got back from David Peterson earlier this year when they really made their first trade off. Do either of these guys show a pulse and give you a potential roadmap to a first baseman of the future? Or is this, I think either way, the Mets probably need to prioritize first base in the offseason, because holy shit, their production there has been absolutely dreadful this year, like to a ridiculous degree. But, do any of these three guys, Clifford, Amick, Mathis, stand out amongst the rest and at least maybe give you something to look at the position, not next year, but a few years down the line? We'll see. And then here's what we're gonna do. Doing some things on the fly here, but I want to talk about where we are. There we go. Where we're currently at overall with the 2026 Mets trade deadline. So far this season, I would say that the Mets have traded off three guys now. They traded David Peterson to the Cubs earlier this year. This is an early trade that they made. And then in the last few days, AJ Minter's gone to the Twins. Freddy Peralta's gone to Tampa Bay. So far, the Mets have acquired Aiden Smith, Emilian Pitre, Cole Mathis, Gary Gil Hill, Bruin Agbayani, and Billy Amick. So of these 6 players, 5 of them are now ranked in the Mets top 25. None have cracked the Mets top 10. So a lot more depth getting injected into this Mets farm system, which I think sorely needed it. I still think they obviously need more high-end talent as well, with just the way that the farm has taken a hit this year between trading away Jet Williams, graduating guys like Ewing and McLean and Thornton and Benj, and then the underperformances of a lot of guys like Clifford and Tong and Wenninger and Santucci have had ups and downs, and other guys of that ilk. It's been a bit of a rough season for the farm system. So I think moves like this can help inject more into the farm system. Obviously, you'd like to see a little bit more of the quality over quantity. But again, with what the Mets are trading away here, I think Freddy Peralta is probably the best trade chip that they had. You could potentially argue a Clay Holmes or a Luke Weaver. Weaver's tough because he's a reliever. He does have the benefit of being under control next year, so that does make him more valuable. Maybe teams are willing to give up a little bit more, but I mean, you saw with the relievers last year, even the ones that the Mets went out and acquired, some pretty good relievers that they went out and got, and they didn't give up any top prospects. They gave up quantity. Jesus Baez is a guy that maybe they regret trading away, but at the time, I think he was ranked 13th, 14th in the system. These guys are not netting top prospects like you would see maybe 10 years ago when the Yankees were getting Clint Frazier for Andrew Miller, or guys like Aroldis Chapman were going for Gleyber Torres, I think was that trade. Those types of deals don't seem to happen very much anymore. That being said, Luke Weaver's probably the best relief pitcher who's actually available on the market, with Chapman not going anywhere now that the Red Sox have had I think the best month in their history. So they're not going to be sellers anymore, which benefits the Mets. And the Padres have been hot. So I would think that Mason Miller getting traded seems pretty unlikely at this point. Maybe that's an offseason thing that they could look into. So with those two guys not available, I do think that Weaver is probably the most valuable reliever left on the market. So we'll see what that nets them in return. But left potentially guys that the Mets could trade. Clay Holmes, who made his rehab start on Sunday in full, pitched fairly well. I think he gave up 3-4 runs, but a lot of the people who were watching that game said, defense behind him was pretty rough. He's pitching in single A, and the results don't really matter too much as long as he's just getting out there, throwing pitches, not feeling any, ill effects coming off of the injury. So you've got Clay Holmes, Luke Weaver, Brooks Raley, Oscar Brazaban, who we thought for a split second earlier today was traded because he was hugging guys in the bullpen, but apparently that was, I don't know if that was a purposeful troll or like an innocent thing where he's just hugging people hello, but the SNY camera crews caught that. Thought maybe he was going somewhere, but so far he hasn't. He's got a few years left to control as well, so that makes him an interesting candidate. Luis Robert Jr. in terms of position players, there was even a little buzz on Kodai Senga today from Joel Sherman saying the Padres were interested in him potentially. I think if the Mets could get literally anything for Kodai Senga, they would probably do it at this point. Tyrone Taylor has been amazing lately. The best offensive season he's had in his career, best offensive season he's had with the Mets, obviously. And then potentially, I don't think that the Mets will trade either of their catchers, but they've been mentioned in enough rumors that I added them to this. If you're watching this on YouTube, this on-screen graphic of Luis Torrens and Francisco Alvarez. Again, I don't think they're giving those guys up, especially Alvarez, unless they get some kind of crazy return back, which at this point, I just personally would not expect. So the Mets have traded 3 guys away. They've acquired 6 guys, all young, all going right into the farm system. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys who I think all very well may get traded in the next 24 hours. And then 2 wild cards. And no, as you see, I didn't include Francisco Lindor. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole anymore. I'm glad that, things have seemed to at least quiet down on the Francisco Lindor front so far. That's kind of the state of everything right now with the offseason, or excuse me, with the trade deadline. And I think it's going to be very, very active. I'm curious if any trades go down while we're still doing this show. The Yankees just got Luis Garcia from the Nationals, that's a solid addition for the Yankees, honestly. Interested does that mean the Nationals are selling, or are they just swapping guys? Will be interesting because they've had a nice little season, but it does seem like they're kind of cooling off and are realizing that. But we'll be curious to see how many of these moves happen, because that's a lot of trades to happen for a single team in a 24 and a half hour span at this point. Maybe some of these guys get packaged together, and then I'll be curious just which guys actually stick around that we're not expecting. Maybe what if Clay Holmes actually sticks around and the extension that went from they were talking about it to now they're not talking about it, maybe he sticks around and then all of a sudden they do find some headway. I still kind of think he's going to get traded. I'd prefer that they would try to keep him, but when you're talking about 7, 8, 9 guys, I doubt they're all going to get traded. So that'll also be interesting just to see, who is going to, be left here after everything. Let's go to some of the comments. Not a super hot comment section so far today. But there's this one from David Crockett right now. What's up, David? Who asked, how much do we trust Stearns to be in charge of the fire sale? I mean, super fair question. And I the honest answer that I have is I don't know. Stearns has, we've talked about him a lot this year. He talked about him a lot in the offseason when we weren't really loving the way things were shaking out for the first month or two. And obviously how this season has turned out and how last season went. He has really not earned the benefit of the doubt. If anything, it's the opposite. And, people almost expect his moves to fail before we actually see how they play out, because he's kind of earned that. Look at the state of this team. They have absolutely no business being as bad as they are right now. And it's not all his fault. There's been a lot of guys that they acquired who are not even remotely in the same solar system to their career averages this year. Obviously, the president of baseball operations or guys in the front office can't always predict that. But at the same time, when it's happening so, wide throughout their roster, and you've had 2 disappointing seasons in a row. Last year was a second half collapse. This year has just been an unmitigated disaster, basically since the 3rd game of the season. it falls on the guys in charge, and the manager is gone. The coaching staff is gone. Most of the core of players is gone. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't ultimately matter what the process was or how far off guys are from their career norms or injuries or any of that. It is a results-oriented business, and the results haven't been there for 2 years now. And you can count on one hand the amount of good moves that Stearns has made that have actually turned out to be good versus, how many hands would you need to count the moves that have turned out to be pretty bad, especially these last 2 years. It's been rough. Clay Holmes is one of the only good moves from the last 2 years that you can really look at. Clay Holmes and re-signing Brooks Raley to a 2-year deal when he was hurt. Those are the two that stand out to me. And then there's a lot of crap mixed in there. A lot of things that either you didn't like at the time, like a Frankie Montas, or, that you thought might work out that didn't work out. It's like your Bo Bichette category, your Freddy Peralta, the list goes on. So do I trust David Stearns to sell? Not particularly. That being said, look, I at this point, I guess I would trust him more as a seller than a buyer, because we really haven't seen him successfully buy in his time with the Mets. So, I would hope that his evaluation of prospects will be good. I hope his ability to negotiate with teams will be something that is an advantage to him. And I do think that one advantage that the Mets have is with this third wild card situation, and the fact that the leagues, especially the American League, but the leagues in general, are pretty flat outside of the Dodgers and the Brewers, I guess, that there's so many teams that are still in it that there's really not many sellers and there's a lot of buyers. And the Mets kind of seem to have most of the pieces for this deadline. Like Skubal has been moved now, so that ship is off the table. They've already moved Peralta and Minter and even Peterson early in the year. But the Mets kind of control the state of the trade deadline this year. And for one of very few teams that is a dedicated seller this year, I do hope that plays to their advantage. How will David Stearns take advantage of that is yet to be seen. I think so far with the moves he's made, it seems like it's been solid so far. Again, these are things we're not even going to know about for years in the future. Who thought PCA was going to turn into an MVP candidate every year when they traded for Javi Baez? I know people didn't like it at the time, but I don't think people thought PCA was going to be this type of offensive player. And then on the other side, everybody thought Jared Kelenic was going to be the next megastar when they traded for Edwin Diaz, and that wound up being the complete opposite. So these are not, we'll all have opinions and we'll bring on experts and all that stuff to evaluate this and analyze it, but we're not really going to know how the Mets did for a while. And the other thing that we have to think about is, are the Mets acquiring all these prospects to build up their farm system and do a little bit of a soft rebuild? Or are they acquiring all these prospects so that they can trade a bunch of them in the offseason because they're trying to, again, be competitive next year and not do a rebuild 4 years into this David Stearns tenure with the payroll that they have? And, God knows, again, what's going to happen with the CBA, and is there going to be salary cap or not? What are the rules going to be? So, there's a lot to be seen, and David Stearns is going to have to prove a lot, not just at this deadline, but in the offseason and next year. Another one from David says, maybe he's great with prospects, but bad with pro personnel. Yeah, again, I could buy that. We'll see. The guy did help build up the Brewers. He obviously didn't do it alone. The Brewers are still pretty great without him, with Matt Arnold and those guys. We'll see. It's tough to give Stearns the benefit of the doubt or, project any sort of confidence in him because they're in this situation that they're in right now, in large part because of David Stearns. They have to sell because he did a bad job. So, I don't know how confident I am that he can fix all the mistakes that he made himself. This one's from CJ. What's up, CJ? He says, trade whoever. I'm not sure they can compete next year. And then he adds on in the second comment, except the few untouchables. Yeah, I mean, I get this. I see a lot of this sentiment online. The one thing I would remind people of is that it's baseball, and a lot of people said this in 2023. The Mets themselves told Max Scherzer they didn't expect to compete in 2024, and then they went to the NLCS. Yeah, that was like a magical run. So I wouldn't expect that kind of thing to happen again, especially with the bad start that they got off to that year. But in baseball, you can get good again pretty quick, especially with that third wild card. And other than the Dodgers and the Yankees and a handful of other teams, there's not these like titans that are amazing every single year. There's always teams that come out of the woodwork, and with the analytics that you hope will give them some sort of an advantage, with the payroll flexibility that this team has, with the owner that they have, again, assuming that there's not a salary cap implemented, with those sorts of things, and with the rise of some of these young players like Ewing and Benj and McLean and maybe even Thornton and some of these other guys that may come up over the last 2 months of the season, you get some health, you bring in some better pros. I don't see why this team can't compete next year. I know it's hard to see now because they're just such dog shit, but I'm not going to throw away 2027 because 2026 was a waste. So yeah, I'm like, I'll trade any of those guys that we had on the list before. But when you're talking about like core dudes like Soto and Lindor or any of the young guys we just talked about, like that, you trade those guys away, then you're giving up for not just next year, but probably several years. And I don't personally have the appetite for that, but I don't think Steve Cohen and David Stearns have the appetite for that either. Those guys need to win. Do you think David Stearns can afford to start a rebuild in year 4 after the last 2 fucking years? He's going to get run out of town when that contract runs out, because they probably will not have finished that rebuild by that point. So, yeah, I think they're going to try to compete next year. You can have a debate if they should or shouldn't, but I mean, that's what I would do. And again, it's baseball. This isn't the NBA. This isn't even football. Like things can turn around pretty quick. All right. I think we're going to get into our segments. And as long as there are no more Met trades. Oh, Mitch Voigt just hit his first home run in AA. Shout out to him, another Mets prospect. Their first round pick from last year. But yeah, we're going to get into our segments now. And we're going to start off with our curtain call. So if you're unfamiliar, our curtain call is the thing we give up every week. A person or player associated with the Mets who did so good that we want them to walk up to the top step and give a curtain call to the crowd. There's some, solid candidates. I think I'm going to go with a bit of a curveball here. Pun, I guess, intended. But I'm going to give it to Robert Stock, man. Robert Stock, like in years like this where things are so bad and hard to watch, I think you really get to appreciate the human side of baseball. And watching Robert Stock go out there on Sunday and have the longest outing of his major league career, going 5 innings, he gives up just 3 hits, 1 run, 4 strikeouts, no walks. At age 36, coming off of thoracic outlet surgery. This guy has been a journeyman most of his career. I mean, some Met fans might remember him. He was on this team in 2021 very briefly. So it's 5 long years ago. And thoracic outlet syndrome is, as we know, incredibly difficult to come back from. It is largely a career killer for pitchers. You look at Matt Harvey and Chris Carpenter, Chris Archer, Tyson Ross, that thing has killed a lot of really talented starting pitchers. And Stock is a guy who's really never hit his stride in the big league level. And for him to come back and get a chance in the major leagues and kind of make this emergency start, because he wasn't originally slated to make this start, and do what he did, despite it being for a really bad team, despite it being in a losing effort, I think is really cool. And it's just really cool to see, the spirit of competition and just like the human condition of it all, where it's just a cool story. And I think that, when Robert Stock hangs it up and he kind of looks back on his career, I think that today is probably a moment that he's going to be really proud of. And I just thought it was really cool to watch. And I really appreciated the effort. And, obviously Stock's not going to be a part of this team probably much this year. Definitely not past this year, but just on a human personal level, really cool to see. Like, shout out to that guy. That is a very difficult journey that he went on just to afford himself the opportunity to do what he did today. And what he did was like pretty awesome. So shout out to Robert Stock, man. El Stinko, hard pivot here. This is the player associated with the Mets who did so bad that Keith Hernandez just let out a huge El Stinko in the booth. And I really think I guess there's always a lot of options, especially this season, because his team sucks. But if you were paying attention at all this past week, you really know that there's only one actual option here for El Stinko, and it is Jorge fucking Polanco. Oh my God. This guy stinks. El Stinko to the highest degree. Jorge Polanco, it comes up on Sunday, bases loaded, nobody out, Nets down 1-0 in the 7th inning. Just needs a fly ball. Hey, get your season going, get things moving here. Let's have a nice little spoilery type win against the Marlins. No, Jorge Polanco strikes out on a pitch in the dirt. The 3 swings that he took were pretty hapless. His bat looks as slow as I've ever seen somebody at the major league level. And I'm somebody who's watched like a 57-year-old Bobby Abreu play for the Mets wearing camo Mets uniforms. We've seen some over the hill past their prime dudes play for this Mets team over the years. And Jorge Polanco, he makes Jed Lowry look like a good contract. He is now 0 for his last 26. His OPS starts with a 3. His OPS starts with the number 3. Is a 387 OPS this year. This was the Pete Alonso replacement. This was the guy you were like, yeah, let's have this guy play first base for the first time in his career in his early to mid 30s with an injury history. And what happens? He gets injured right away, was horrible before he got hurt, has been somehow worse since he got better. I'm sure he's not fully healthy, and God knows if he'll ever be. This guy's also making $20 million this year, and then another $20 million next year, at least in terms of the AAV. I think technically he's making a little bit less this year, if I remember correctly, which is great for next year. Jorge Polanco has been, in a series of moves from David Stearns that have just absolutely blown up in this team's face. Jorge Polanco might take the cake. This might be worse than Frankie Montas. This might be worse than Bo Bichette. I think the Jorge Polanco signing might be David Stearns' worst move as a front office executive in Major League Baseball. It is utterly impossible for a player to be this bad at the Major League level. And this is a guy who had a walk-off hit in the playoffs last year that sent the Mariners to the championship series, to the ALCS. And his OPS starts with a fucking 3. It's unbelievable. It is truly astounding how bad and inept Jorge Polanco has been this year. He's the El Stinko, not just for the week. He shout out to Michael Barron who texted me this. He might be the El Stinko for the year and for David Stearns' career. He has been absolutely horrible. And that's all I got to say about it. Weekly predictions again. You'll see Andrew's not here. He's got some birthday celebrations already going underway, so he's spending some time with some family. I won the week again this week. I had picked 3 and 4 yet again. The week predictions, the weekly predictions came down to the final game. Andrew and Alston Trone, who took my place last week on the show, they jointly picked 4 and 3. I think that was largely influenced by Al because Andrew has been far more pessimistic than that. But yeah, the Mets go 3 and 4. The season standings now, if my math is correct, is I've won 14 weeks to Andrew's 4. So I've run away with that this year. The Mets are off on Monday. So no games for the Mets on the day of the trade deadline, so we can fully lock into the deadline. Then they go on the road, 3 in Cleveland against the Guardians, and then 3 in Pittsburgh against the Pirates. They actually have a 9-game road trip. They'll start the next week in Atlanta as well. I'm going with 2 and 4. And Andrew texted me earlier today that regardless of who won this week, he was going to pick 1 and 5. So those are our predictions for the week. And again, Andrew and I will be reuniting finally. I know it's been kind of one or the other. I think either my dad or my uncle texted right before the show today that feels like summer of Mike and the Mag Dog, where there's only ever one of them at a time. But we'll be getting back together tomorrow. We'll be doing a live stream of the trade deadline. Stay tuned on what time that actually starts. It might be 4 p.m. Eastern, might be 5 p.m. But Andrew's going to start the live stream first on his own because I have a day job, so I have to finish out my work. The deadline is at 6 p.m., so I should be jumping on with Andrew right around when the deadline is going to pass. We will react to everything live as it happens in the moment, and then afterwards analyze things and answer, any questions that people have, comments, reacting to everything that happened at the deadline, and then, looking forward to the rest of the year and how we think things are going to play out. So yeah, man, I think that's it. I'm going to do one last check of Twitter to make sure that there have been no other Met trades, which doesn't seem like anything is in the works at the moment. It seems like really the only trade that's happened so far today since Freddy Peralta was the Luis Garcia trade, which just happened, where he goes from the Nationals to the Yankees, which again, I think is pretty solid trade for the Yankees. I guess Jameson Taillon got traded earlier today, but he was already DFA'd, so almost like a formality type of trade. Jameson Taillon, very, very bad. That was a guy that we wanted the Mets to sign a couple of years ago, and thank God that they didn't. Yeah, looks like that is about it. So if the Mets make any more trades tonight that are of significance, if they trade like a Brazaban, I don't know that warrants going live, but if they do something a little bit bigger, I'll hop back on and react to it live. Otherwise, join us on Monday on our YouTube channel, where we will be broadcasting live right before the trade deadline and all the way through the 6 p.m. deadline. Should be a lot of fun. Should be a lot of moves coming. The Mets have a lot more work to do. Until then, though, thank you guys for listening. If you're watching on the YouTube, please like and subscribe this video. Hype it if you're watching it on your phone. It does a huge help for us as we continue to try to grow the channel. We're just shy of 6,000 subscribers here on YouTube. So if you could help us crack that the next day, that would be amazing. If you're listening on the podcast apps, please remember to subscribe, download, give us a 5-star rating and review. Again, this all helps us in the algorithms and all that stuff, and this lovely world of technology and robot algorithms that we're living in now. But we'll be back tomorrow. Until then, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. Let's go Mets. And in the words of the immortal Gary Cohen, we are out of here.